My name is Jules. Welcome to Part of Your Story, a podcast from After School Matters and the Creative Impostor Studios in Chicago. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Power Your Story podcast. My name is Adrian, and I'm here with my co-hosts Beck, Jacob, Jayvon, Juan, and Jules. Today's episode is a roundtable discussion where we'll be discussing the Russia-Ukraine topic. Before we begin, we will also like to mention that we are in solidarity with Ukraine. We hope the conflict is resolved soon and hope they can find peace.
To start off this conversation, I'm going to give a brief summary about the Russia-Ukraine situation. So it all started with Ukraine wanting to join part of NATO, but Russia doesn't allow and doesn't want Ukraine to be part of NATO. This conflict has been ongoing. It's very complicated to explain. At first, it started in 2014 when Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, which is the border between Ukraine and Russia. And then eventually it moved on to what it is now, where it is Russia invading Ukraine and trying to take over the territory back and trying to, basically tell Ukraine to join them again because that's what they want. Basically, back then, Ukraine was part of Russia, and eventually they split because Russia wanted to be independent and wanted to be its own country, but Russia wasn't really agreeing with that. So with the current conflict now, they're trying to get Ukraine back with them, but Ukraine doesn't want to. Ukraine wants to be its own independent country and wants to be part of NATO because they're not part of NATO yet. And NATO's where they will give any type of military decisions and they'll be allowed to work with other countries inside of NATO, but because of the conflict, they really can't do much.
Okay, thank you, Jules, for that summary. I would like to introduce some of the topics. So, how do we think the U.S. can help Ukraine?
Well, from what we've been seeing, the United States has already been sending a lot of weapons with NATO and kind of stuff like that, and also government sanctions, like economic sanctions on Russia. And I think that is a good start. They recognize Ukraine as an independent country, which is helpful to struggle between Russia and Ukraine.
So economic sanctions are the US, they are canceling products from Russia. So people can't buy these products. So the income don't get to Russia. So their economic is going down. So eventually they will have a lack of financial aid and they can't support the military forces. Yeah. So eventually it's stopping Russia from getting money from other countries by selling their products.
I've seen that on the news recently. That is a very smart way to help out Ukraine and Russia by stopping Russia's financial aid and messing up their whole thing they got going on. I think that's a good idea. What do you guys think are ways we can help Ukraine, us as individuals?
Well, we can start off by educating others on the topic and explaining to them what's going on. By doing that, more people are gonna know what's going on in the conflict, and they're not gonna be as ignorant about it, and they're actually gonna take in consideration that this should be taken seriously because there's some people who make jokes about the situation, which shouldn't really happen because a lot of people are being affected by this. So we need to consider other people's feelings, and I would say educating others on it, and then possibly donating if you can, and if you have access to any type of money, then possibly donating to Ukrainian organizations or just human rights organizations that will be sending that money to help people in Ukraine with any type of way to get them out of Ukraine or helping them make sure that they have a stable place where they're going to be safe.
I agree with what Jules had mentioned about educating people about the situation because I feel the main thing everyone can do that they don't even have to put money towards or anything is just being educated about the subject and also not making jokes about it. I also agree with that because it's just not right. And also we can donate goods. I seen on the news that people are collecting sleeping bags, medical supplies, just as much things people would need during this time of crisis for Ukraine. So I think what Jules said is pretty spot on.
So I would like to add that we also can support these movements that some stores have started. For example, I saw one the other day, I think was in Barnes & Noble, where you buy certain types of books and some percentage of the money will go directly to Ukraine. So people will be supported with food and like supplements so they can be safe. That's another way we can help sharing this kind of movements through social media.
Okay, I think those are solid ways that we as people can help Ukraine. I agree with what everyone said. What do we think about the fear of nuclear weapons being used in this war?
I think people is scared that with the nuclear weapons, it's something like what happens with Japan many, many years ago, where they launched this atomic bomb and many people like died, and some of them didn't die, but they get like injured like severely. So people is scared something like that start to happen like all around the world. Russia starts like to a fight with another countries just because some countries are trying to help Ukraine instead of helping Russia. So people is scared that maybe Russia starts like to throw bombs away to different countries just because they are not getting support from any country.
I agree with what Juan is saying. Like the Russia might get sour and try to drop nuclear or try to use weaponry of that type of sort on Ukraine. I think that would be a very, very bad thing to do, because not only does the initial with the initial blast itself kill lots of people, but the long-term effects of radiation poisoning and being exposed to that stuff and the burns will also plague the people of Ukraine for a very, very long time, the innocent people of Ukraine for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone is saying. And Russia is one of the top armies, like funded armies in the world. And with their assault on Ukraine also not going as well, it also brings a looming threat of nuclear weapons if Putin were to get frustrated with how it is going, like Jayvon said. So I think it is important to say that it can happen.
What are the long-term effects we think that this war can have on Ukraine, or just us as like a world or a society? Ukraine and Russia.
So what are the long effects? First of all, one that like we are seeing right now is like the affecting economic. So for example, the gasoline, the prices are going up. So I think eventually prices are going up and up and up, and eventually things will be like way more expensive than they are now due to the war, because many products came from Russia. So yeah, one effect in long term will be like the economic.
Yeah, also adding to Juan's point, another thing that would be long-term effect is rebuilding the country again, because this has been a lot of damage done.
I would like to say that I think that, like, I agree with what Jules said. Rebuilding would be a very costly thing to do, as Russia are targeting some of the main and crucial things that Ukraine as a society needs, such as hospitals and different things like that, air bases and very expensive places. And I think that it would be bad for people in Russia also, because people are going to paint Russians in a bad, like this entire war is going to paint Russians in a bad light. And Russia itself, while being sanctioned, is going to be having troubles with their prices, like what Juan said, things like that.
To build off of what you guys said, not only economically, but I think mentally it'll affect everyone involved in Ukraine and even in Russia, because as Jayvon said, people are going to be looking at Russian people in a different way. Because I've heard and seen that many people in Russia don't even want to have this war. It's mainly like Putin and the government that want to take back Ukraine, which it sucks for the people in Russia and Ukraine, because they really can't do anything about it.
How do we think this affects the people with families in Ukraine who are in the U.S. or people just in Ukraine in general? I think one of the main issues in this war is that they're not necessarily looking at the people and the humans that are involved. Like I seen the other day, they bombed a children's hospital. That is, Putin is not, he's looking at Ukraine as just a state. He's not valuing the people that live there and the civilians that are being, how do I say, like pulled into this conflict that he's creating. And I think that's a very bad thing. My school is in a Ukrainian neighborhood. So a lot of people in my school are Ukrainian. And I see when they come to school, they're always watching the news, seeing what's going on with Ukraine, and they seem kind of down. I think that's really sad, because they have families in Ukraine and they're all the way across countries. So that's very sad for them.
Continuing to what Jayvon says, I agree. So it's sad to see like people here who is from Ukraine and they have like family there and their families are dying and they can't do nothing about it, because it's not like they are going to cross the country just to get there and get killed. But I think the most sad part is that many people from Ukraine can't like leave the country because it's impossible to leave the country because the borders are like full of soldiers and they are getting killed. So I think it's sad to see those families like see how people kill each other. Like they don't have like a way to escape from that.
Do you have hope that we can ever have a world without war, or do you think that war is inevitable and there's always going to be conflicts?
I do feel like it is possible to get away from these wars and things like that. I think with our current generation, we probably can pull it off because as of right now, we're seeing what war is doing to people, innocent countries, and how they're tearing each other apart. So I think we can learn from what these like past generations are doing right now and be able to use that to build a more peaceful world when we get older and like learn from our past mistakes. So I do think there's hope that we can be war free.
So I don't want like to be the pessimistic part, but I disagree with what Jayvon says because fears people, especially politicians, they are always looking for power. So they always want like in this case, like the Ukraine and Russia case, I'll start just because Putin was like this power of this land. He want this land just like he can put like new companies and new like military bases so he can have more power. So besides, yeah, we are in a generation that has experienced all these tragedies and things like, and people is like kind of more conscious. I think war is not something that can just go away because people is always looking for power, and especially in politics, people is always like they just want more and more and more. So they will be always like looking for ways so they can have this power and more power and more power. So eventually that need of power will become war between different regions, either a country with another country or a country against itself. But again, I don't want to be like the pessimistic part. I hope we can like reach a perfect war without wars. It will be like the best outcome for us.
Yeah, I don't want to like also like sound so negative, but I agree with Juan because, well, I've always heard the phrase history repeats itself. So I genuinely think that although we would want to not be involved in war or for war to like continue, we really can't avoid it at all. It will still continue no matter what because people will always seek ways to like gain power. Some people are going to try to use hard power and like try to gain it in a way that like means war, while others are going to try to gain it peacefully. But regardless, it will still eventually someone end up in a big conflict.
Yeah, I have to agree with Jules and Juan on this one because I was going to mention, as Jules said, that history always repeats itself. You would have thought that we would have learned from World War I and World War II and even wars before that, but obviously we haven't because we still have conflicts still happening. And honestly, I just think that wars, as you guys said, that people want power, and I think it's also because it can start because of hate. Like, imagine a little kid in Ukraine is seeing what's happening, and then he just grows up hating Russia, and then he just gets all this power, and then he starts a war on Russia. It just all repeats itself. I mean, that's the way I see it.
I just want to say that this whole conflict is very sad, and a lot of people are losing their lives, and I hope that we very, very soon we can end this, then we can rebuild Ukraine and people can get back to their normal lives and we can stop all of this like senseless killing over power and stuff that doesn't even really matter.
I agree with what Jayvon says. So I think governments, and in this case Putin, has like to think more about the value of life more than in the value of land and power.
Thank you so much for listening to our roundtable discussion on the Russia-Ukraine war. This episode was produced by Adrian, Jules, Juan, Beck, Dwayne, and myself, Jayvon. Follow us on socials at Power Your Story Podcast and in your favorite listening app. I would like to tell you all to have a great rest of your day, and we hope you can donate to Ukraine and help Ukraine in any way that you want, any way that you can, and hopefully that this conflict can be end very soon.
Power Your Story Podcast is produced by Chicago High School students with production support from After School Matters and the Creative Impostor Studios.
Our theme music is by our very own Gennaro Jackson, aka Professor DJ Sparkz. Give it up. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pandora. We are on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube as well as Power Your Story Podcast. Follow us and share our show with friends and family.
Thank you for listening. Peace.